pulled my truck to a stop and checked my map, trying to figure out how I had gotten so turned around. I thought taking a shortcut through this forested area would save me time, but now I was lost on this winding road, surrounded by trees that seemed to tower above me. I looked around for any signs of civilization, but there was nothing but dense forest in every direction. I decided to turn around and retrace my steps back the way I had come, but as I shifted into reverse, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. It was a figure, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then it moved, taking a step closer. I froze, my heart racing as I realized that I wasn't alone out here in the woods. I slammed the truck into drive and hit the gas, hoping to put some distance between me and whatever was out there in the darkness. But as I drove, I could feel eyes on me, watching my every move. The road seemed to twist and turn in endless loops, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded, like some kind of prey. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but as the night wore on, I began to see movement out of the corner of my eye. It was always just a flicker, a blur of movement in the darkness, but I knew that I was being followed. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the movement stopped, and the woods around me fell silent. I was about to breathe a sigh of relief when I saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing like hot coals in the darkness, just beyond the tree line. They were fixed on me, unblinking, and I knew that whatever was behind them was not of this world. I tried to hit the gas, but the truck wouldn't budge. It was like something was holding it in place, rooting me to the spot as the eyes crept closer, step by step. I was paralyzed, unable to move as the creature emerged from the darkness. It was tall, impossibly so, with long limbs that seemed to bend in all the wrong places. Its skin was slick and black, like oil, and its eyes glowed like embers in the darkness. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, and I knew that I was in deep trouble. The creature moved closer, its long fingers reaching out to me as I tried to scramble back. But it was too late. It was like I was caught in a spider's web, its tendrils wrapping around me, pulling me in. I screamed as the creature pulled me towards it, its jaws opening impossibly wide, ready to devour me whole. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving me alone in the darkness, shaken to my core. I kept driving as fast as I could, but the creature was still following me. It was getting closer, and I could feel its hot breath on my neck. Suddenly, I hit a bump in the road and the truck swerved, nearly tipping over. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the creature leap up and over the truck, landing on the other side. I knew then that I had to do something drastic if I wanted to survive. I reached for the shotgun that I kept under my seat and loaded it with a silver bullet. I knew that silver was said to be deadly to werewolves, and I was hoping it would work on this creature too. I slammed on the brakes and the truck skidded to a stop. The creature was only a few feet away now, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I aimed the shotgun and fired, hitting it square in the chest. The creature let out a blood-curdling howl and fell to the ground. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, the creature began to stir, its body convulsing and twisting. It looked up at me with hatred in its eyes, and I realized that I had only made it angry. The creature leaped to its feet and charged at me. I fired the shotgun again, but this time it didn't even flinch. I knew then that I was in real trouble. I had to get out of the truck and run. I opened the door and jumped out, running as fast as I could into the forest. The creature was hot on my heels, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground behind me. I could hear its ragged breathing and feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. I didn't know how much longer I could keep running, but I knew I had to keep going. I couldn't let it catch me. Finally, I burst through a thicket of bushes and found myself in a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was an old cabin. Without thinking, I ran towards the cabin and burst through the door. I slammed it shut and locked it behind me, panting and gasping for breath. I was safe for the moment, but I knew that the creature was still out there, waiting for me. As I looked around the cabin, I saw that it was old and abandoned. There was no electricity or phone line, and the windows were boarded up. I was trapped, with no way to call for help. I knew that I had to come up with a plan, and fast. I searched the cabin for any weapons or tools that I could use to defend myself, but there was nothing. The only thing I could find was an old wooden chair. I waited there in the dark, listening to the creature as it circled the cabin. I could hear its claws scraping against the wood, and its breathing was getting louder and more ragged. I knew that it was only a matter of time before it found the way in. Finally, the creature attacked. It smashed through one of the boarded-up windows and leaped into the cabin, its jaws snapping and its claws slashing. I swung the wooden chair, hitting it in the face and knocking it back. But it was only a momentary reprieve. The creature regained its footing and charged at me again. I swung the chair again, but this time it shattered into pieces. I was defenseless. I knew then that I was going to die. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the creature's attack. But it never came. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. I was left alone in the dark, trembling and scared. I didn't know what had happened to the creature or why it had suddenly disappeared, but I'll never forget the feeling of being hunted, the sense of being nothing more than a piece of prey to something far more powerful than myself. Now let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. I had been driving my rig for hours, the only sounds around me the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. The road stretched out in front of me, long and empty, with nothing but darkness and shadows to keep me company. That's when I saw him, a figure standing on the side of the road, thumbing for a ride. I normally wouldn't stop for anyone, but I felt a strange compulsion to pick him up. As soon as he got in, I knew something was off. He was pale and thin, his eyes sunken and haunted. But before I could ask him any questions, he spoke. "Thank you for stopping," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting for someone like you." I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine and asked him where he was headed. He told me he was going to a small town just up ahead, and that he needed to get there before midnight. We rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the rustle of the wind outside. But as we got closer to the town, the hitchhiker started to act strange. He muttered to himself and shook uncontrollably, his eyes darting around as if he was seeing things that weren't there. I tried to calm him down, but he just kept getting worse. And then, out of nowhere, he lunged at me, his fingers curling into claws. I swerved off the road and slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The truck skidded to a halt, and I watched in horror as the hitchhiker vanished into thin air. For a moment, I sat there, stunned and unsure of what had just happened. And then, I heard it, a low, guttural growling that seemed to be coming from all around me. I looked out the windshield and saw that I was surrounded by figures, ghostly and pale like the hitchhiker. I tried to start the truck, but the engine wouldn't turn over. And then, they started to come closer, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I knew then that I was in serious trouble. As they closed in on the truck, I saw the hitchhiker among them, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. He was leading the charge, and I knew then that he was seeking revenge on the living. I prayed for a miracle as the ghosts clawed at the windows and doors, their wails filling the night air. But none came, and I knew that my time was up. The last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was the hitchhiker's face, his eyes filled with a hatred that would never die. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, it was still dark. Everything felt normal, like nothing ever happened. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and continued driving, but the hitchhiker's words kept ringing in my ears. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze on my neck, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned to face the hitchhiker, but he had vanished. My heart pounding, I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the truck. I searched around, but there was no sign of the hitchhiker. I got back in the truck and tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering voice coming from outside. It was the hitchhiker, his ghostly figure was walking towards the truck. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. The hitchhiker reached the truck, his face now twisted in a grotesque expression of anger. In a flash, he vanished, and the engine roared back to life. I frantically put the truck in gear and peeled out of there as fast as I could, my heart racing. But as I drove away, I realized that the hitchhiker's ghostly presence was still with me. I could feel his cold breath on the back of my neck and his icy touch on my skin. I knew then that I was not alone, and that I would never be able to escape his wrath. I drove through the night, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, praying that I would make it to my destination. But with every mile that passed, the hitchhiker's ghostly presence grew stronger, and I knew that I was running out of time. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, I saw a glimmer of hope. A small town was just ahead, and I knew that I could find help there. But as I pulled into town, I realized that I was not alone. The hitchhiker's ghostly figure was still with me, and he was now more powerful than ever. I knew then that I was trapped, and that the hitchhiker's revenge would be complete. He had claimed another victim, and I was his torment for eternity. I had driven through many small towns in my career as a truck driver, but this one was different. There was an eerie feeling in the air, a sense that something wasn't quite right. The people in the town all seemed to be staring at me as I drove through the main street, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I made my delivery and tried to leave as quickly as possible, but my truck wouldn't start. I got out to check the engine, and that's when I saw them. A group of people, dressed in robes, were gathering around me. They were chanting in a language I didn't understand, and I could feel their eyes on me. I tried to start the truck again, but it wouldn't budge. The cult members began to close in on me, their eyes filled with an otherworldly glow. I knew then that I was in trouble. One of them approached me and whispered something in my ear. It was a language I had never heard before, but I could sense the malice behind the words. I tried to run, but they caught me and brought me to their temple. The temple was a large building at the edge of town, and it was filled with strange symbols and altars. The cult members tied me up and began to perform a ritual, chanting and dancing around me. I could feel the power of their god growing stronger, and I knew that I was in grave danger. Suddenly, the chanting stopped, and the room grew quiet. A figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the god they worshipped, a creature so ancient and terrible that I couldn't even comprehend its form. It reached out to touch me, and I felt a surge of pain shoot through my body. I screamed as the creature began to drain the life from me, sucking out my essence and leaving me a shell of my former self. I somehow managed to break free and hid behind a giant tree. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should run or stay put. My instincts told me to get out of there as fast as I could, but my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to stay hidden and watch what was going on. The cult members started chanting in an unknown language, their voices rising in intensity with each passing moment. Suddenly, they all fell silent, and I saw the old man I had spoken to earlier walk up to the altar. He lifted a dagger high in the air and brought it down on the sacrificial lamb's neck, spilling its blood onto the altar. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind couldn't comprehend the fact that I had stumbled upon a cult that practiced human sacrifice. I was frozen in place, unable to move or scream. Suddenly, one of the cult members noticed me hiding in the shadows. He pointed in my direction, and the other members turned to look at me. I knew I had to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I stumbled and fell as I tried to get away, but one of the cult members caught up to me and grabbed me by the arm. I struggled to break free, but his grip was too strong. He dragged me back to the altar, where the old man was waiting. "You've seen too much," the old man said, his voice cold and menacing. "You must be sacrificed." I screamed and pleaded for my life, but they didn't listen. They tied me to the altar, and I felt the cold blade of the dagger against my neck. As the old man raised the dagger high in the air, I closed my eyes and prayed for a miracle. Suddenly, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The cult members panicked and scattered in all directions, leaving me behind. The police arrived just in time to save my life. I spent the next few days in the hospital recovering from my injuries. I was traumatized by what I had seen and experienced, and I knew that I would never be the same again. Even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night. The image of the old man holding the dagger and the sound of the cult members chanting haunt me to this day. I learned the hard way that sometimes curiosity can lead to the darkest of places, and that some secrets are better left undiscovered. I never drove through that town again, and I never forgot the horror that I experienced. The thought that there are other towns like that, filled with dark secrets and hidden rituals, still haunts me to this day. I drove my rig down the unfamiliar road, the tires crunching on the loose gravel. I had taken this shortcut to save time, but I was starting to regret it. The sky was darkening rapidly, and the trees on either side of the road grew taller and thicker, casting an eerie shadow over everything. I glanced at the GPS on my dashboard, but it was no help. The device had lost its signal miles ago, and I was left with nothing but the faint glow of my headlights to guide me. The road seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning without end. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going in circles. I had seen no signs of civilization for hours, no cars, no houses, no people. Just the forest, the road, and my truck. Then, something strange happened. The forest around me began to change. The trees twisted and warped, their branches growing into gnarled, claw-like appendages. The leaves turned black, and the air grew thick with a strange, acrid smell. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing in my chest. What was happening? Was I hallucinating? I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my vision, but when I looked again, the forest was still twisted and warped. That's when I heard it, a low growling sound, coming from the darkness beyond the trees. It was followed by a howl, high-pitched and mournful. I put the truck in reverse, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the forest had a hold of me, refusing to let me go. The growling grew louder, and I could see a pair of eyes glowing in the darkness. They were red, like embers burning in the night. I could hear something breathing heavily, the sound of hot, fetid air rushing in and out of its nostrils. I tried to start the truck, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The growling grew louder, and I could see the shape of the creature now, its outline illuminated by the headlights. It was massive, with fur as black as the night sky and eyes that burned like fire. I was trapped, with no escape. I could hear the creature getting closer, its breathing growing louder and more frantic. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The creature retreated back into the darkness, leaving me alone in the twisted forest. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. I shifted the truck into gear and gunned the engine. The tires spun for a moment before catching, and I shot forward, leaving the forest behind me. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, miles away. I never took that shortcut again, and I never spoke of what I had seen to anyone. But the memory of those glowing red eyes, and the sound of that growling, haunted me for years to come. I had been driving my truck through the barren desert for hours. My only company was the radio and the sound of the wheels on the road. I was getting close to my destination, but suddenly my headlights caught something in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a group of people standing in the middle of the road, blocking my way. I tried to swerve around them, but they were too quick for me. Before I knew it, they had climbed onto the back of my trailer and started cutting through the locks. I knew I was in trouble, so I grabbed my shotgun and prepared to defend myself. As soon as the doors of the trailer opened, I was met with a horrifying sight. The bandits were not human, but rather creatures from a nightmare. Their skin was gray and leathery, and their eyes glowed with an otherworldly energy. They were armed with strange, otherworldly weapons that I had never seen before. I fired my shotgun, but it was useless against them. They simply shrugged off my shots and continued their assault. I tried to fight back with whatever I could find in the truck, but it was no use. They were too strong and too fast for me. Before I knew it, I was surrounded by them, trapped and helpless. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, taunting me with their twisted laughter as they closed in for the kill. I could feel their breath on my skin, their razor-sharp claws digging into my flesh. Just when I thought it was over, a bright light filled the sky. The creatures shrieked and recoiled in fear, their forms dissolving into ash as the light consumed them. I could see a shape moving in the distance, silhouetted against the light. As it got closer, I realized it was a spaceship hovering above me. A beam of light shot down from the ship, enveloping me in a warm glow. I felt a sense of peace and safety wash over me as I was lifted off the ground and into the ship. Inside the ship, I was met by a group of beings who looked human, but I could tell they were not from this world. They explained to me that they had been tracking the bandits for some time, and that they had been responsible for countless attacks on innocent people like myself. They thanked me for my bravery in fighting back, but warned me that the creatures would continue to hunt humans until they were stopped for good. I knew I had been lucky to survive, and I promised to do whatever I could to help. As I was released from the ship and returned to my truck, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had seen things that no human should ever have to see, and I had been a witness to a battle between worlds. But I also knew that I had been given a second chance, and that I would use it to fight against the darkness that had nearly consumed me.